like to kick us off with a little question, which is asking ourselves, why might we like degree classifications? Why do we want to call degrees first, upper seconds, lower seconds, etc.? Well, besides that just being very simple, we might, for instance, be hoping that that is a measure of a graduate's performance that happens to be quite consistent across different universities. Mark schemes might be very different across institutions, but at the end of the day, we keep seeing in those graduate job market adverts that employers seem to be looking for a 2-1 or a first. So people seem to be believing that degree classes are very consistently awarded across universities. Now, if we were sitting in the LSE, I would now be advising us all to go across the road over to King's to see that already in very close geographic proximity, that just isn't the case. If we are looking across the broad range of degree classification schemes and rules and run them on LSE student data from 2005 to 2010, we would, for instance, find that for every person who would get a first-class degree under all of those rules, we would have at least one person who would only get a first for some of those rules. So clearly, despite the end product first looking the same everywhere, it isn't actually the same product at each university. Now, instead, we might perhaps be hoping that degree classes are a more stable indicator of a graduate's performance, particularly more so than individual course marks. If we think about undergrads in the econ department in their final year, their course mark will just be a single exam. So perhaps a label first just is a bit more stable, and we can test that. I simulated, if you like, a very real life situation of an undergrad facing one either extremely difficult or extremely easy question in one of their exams. And I looked at what that would do to their degree class at the end of their time at LSE. And as it turns out, using LSE rules as well as some alternative benchmarks where we just go off the mark average or we just go off the median mark, we see that between 5 and 7% of all students in each of those simulations see their degree class change after just a single question, being extremely easy, extremely difficult. And we also see, perhaps most strikingly, that actually the proportion of students that are at risk of seeing this happen is really, really big. If we're looking at the LSE rules, we would see that just a bit less than 3 out of 10 of our undergrads between 2005 and 2010 were in a bucket where actually their degree class could have changed simply because there would have been one unexpected, if you like, question in an exam, which really puts to bed the idea that degree classes are particularly stable. That comes with a bit of an upside for something else, which is the question of whether the degree class an undergrad is getting might in itself, completely independent from the sort of ability it might measure, whether that label first class might in itself have some value in the job market for undergrads. And I just plotted on the x-axis the 4th highest mark of LSE undergrads between 2005 and 2010. And on the y-axis, the log wage they had in the job they were in 6 months after they left us. And why did I choose the 4th highest mark? I chose that because it's essentially the entry ticket into getting a first. If you don't have at least 4 marks that are 70 or above, you're for sure not getting a first. If you have those 4, you're in with a very good chance indeed of getting your first. And you see something interesting going on at just this threshold of 70. You see that the wage undergrads get after they leave us is increasing in the 4/5 mark. Of course it is, because we genuinely think that people who score highly in exams might just be more able. But we also see that actually there's this jump happening at around 70, where suddenly you get this entry ticket into getting that wonderful label of first to put on your CV, into your application to the rest of the world. And you could say that this jump that you're seeing around this threshold might genuinely reflect just the value of the label first rather than ability, because as we saw, actually that label first is quite unstable. Around this threshold, people are probably quite similar to each other. And there's been a bit of literature on this topic, actually, which I've approved on in my project and which you can read in a bit more detail in the accompanying note, which really confirms, yes, there is this kind of intrinsic value that's independent of the underlying ability of a graduate. And it is in fact worth usually about 10 to 15 percentage points of the likelihood that a graduate ends up in a particularly highly paying industry after they leave us. And what I think that really means for us is that we need to be much, much more conscious that degree classes are not some neutral cost and benefit free label we're attaching to something. It is something that really matters for our undergrads' future. And we, I think at that point then, need to become much more clearer as to why we're setting the rules as we choose them, why we're not following rules that other universities use. And I think at that point, we really also need some further research to actually understand how this benefit, the labeling benefit of being labeled a first class graduate, how that's affected by university, by the type of rules we're setting, and whether that is something that persists over time, or whether that's just something that happens to be around in your first exposure to the labor market.